What's up guys, in this video I'm going to show you beginners to the game how you can theorycraft and create your own build in Path of Exile and the things that you need to think about when doing so. Having the right mindset is key number one in creating a successful build in Path of Exile. And let me just say this so we get it out of the way. You will probably fail the first time you create a build in Path of Exile. That's how it is. But that's part of the fun, that's part of the learning process. And trust me guys, it is very rewarding when you finally get it right. Hopefully you find the video useful and thank you for watching. What's up guys, Living Nerd Bro here. Today we're going to talk about how you can create and theorycraft your own build in Path of Exile and the things you need to consider and think about when doing so. So let's get into it. The first thing you want to do is to decide what your offensive part of the build is going to consist of, such as a specific skill gem like Fireball, Ethereal Knives, Infernal Blow, and so on and so on. And you should of course also research what kind of support gems you can use with this skill to improve its power. And while not as important as the main offensive skills, it's also a good idea before you start building your build to think about what kind of utility and mobility skills you want to have in your build, such as Lightning Warp, Leap Slam, Whirling Blades for mobility, and maybe a good cast when damage taking setup, along with a spell totem linked with summoned skeletons for utility maybe. And lastly, you should also consider if you want to be using a curse, and if so, decide which one is going to suit your purpose. And I should mention, it's also a really good idea, and I cannot stress this enough, it's a really good idea to always check the skill feedback forums for the specific skill you're planning on using and get some more information to be able to judge whether or not it is a good skill suited for your goals. Now secondly, you'll have to ask yourself, what kind of defenses would you like to use in your build? Are you going to be a life or energy shield based build, or maybe a mix of the two? And what kind of damage mitigation are you going to incorporate into your build? Do you go for evasion, armor, or maybe even a spell such as Arctic Armor? Thirdly, you need to choose a class that you see fit for the purpose of the build, and obviously, some classes are better suited than others for specific builds. For our purpose, I am going to show you how to build a life-based Fireball self-casting witch that uses Arctic Armor as damage mitigation. So, let's get into it. Now the first thing that I do when I start to plan out my skill tree for my build is that I open my Path of Exile passive skill tree planner. And what this does is that it basically gives me a summary of my total skill nodes, percentages, and flat bonuses when I'm done with the build. And with this information I am able to determine whether or not I feel like the build is strong enough for my current goals. And I will put a link of this program in the description, and I recommend you guys download it as well. It's a really nice tool. As you may have noticed, I've posted the tooltip for level 1 Fireball up here in the right corner. And there's a good reason for that. The important thing you always have to check for in a skill gem is the skill gem tags or keywords on the tooltip. As you can see, the keywords for Fireball is Fire, Projectile, Spell, and AoE, which basically stands for Area of Effect. What this tells us is that the Fireball skill is influenced by any skill node or support gem that will affect these keywords. Again, Fire, Projectile, Spell, and AoE. With this knowledge, we now know which skill nodes we need to choose to increase the effectiveness of Fireball. Remember, it is always important to keep an eye on the price, meaning in this case that if you keep reminding yourself throughout the build planning that our focus is to gain a high amount of health and a high amount of total mana and mana regeneration, and of course a high damage on our Fireball skill, then it becomes fairly easy to understand which skill nodes you have to pick up. I am now going to show you an example of what I feel is a good choice of skill nodes that goes along with our set goal. Okay, and here I'm gonna give you a brief explanation on the skill nodes that we chose to achieve this goal. We of course going for the spell damage, cast speed, and elemental damage. All of these skill nodes will buff the damage of our Fireball. Remember that fire is an elemental damage, so elemental damage will buff the damage of Fireball as well. We're going for the mana regeneration nodes, the total mana, and of course life here. We're getting the flask nodes. Don't underestimate these guys, those are very potent if you know how to use them. And yeah, don't underestimate even though they may not seem as sexy as some of the skills or skill notes. Over here we're going for Blast Radius. Blast Radius will increase the damage and area of effect of your Fireball's explosion. Fireball deals damage in two ways. It has an initial hit and it has the explosion, which is the AoE damage. So that's why we're going for increased AoE damage and to increase the radius of how big that damage is. We're then going for, of course, life notes over here. We're getting Eldritch Battery up here. I don't want to explain Eldritch Battery in this video. I'm going to explain that in a different video, so just ignore that for now. Just remember, we always have to meet our set goals that you can see on the screen as well now. We're getting more life down here. We're going for some mana regeneration here, getting more life, getting some fire damage to increase, again, our set goal of having a potent fireball damage. We're getting more fire damage here, even more fire damage. Getting life, and we're moving over here, and as you can see I've chosen block nodes and aura nodes as well, and just as Eldritch Battery, I'm not going to explain that for now because that's we're just complicating things. Just remember, have your set goals in mind, so that's why we're choosing these life nodes as well. We're getting Celestial Walker to increase our elemental resistance, but also elemental damage, and I've just made a mistake. I see I should pick up these notes as well. That's how I did in my build guide as well. And we're doing that, of course, to increase our fireball damage, but also to reach this note, which will give us mana regeneration rate. We're then going for some extra life here, and the last things we're going for is the Shaper down here and some life and mana total to further improve our mana pool and our life pool. We can now ask ourselves, did we achieve the goal that we set out to begin with? And this is where this program comes in handy as well, because let's take a look at our defenses. We have a 202% increased maximum life, and from my experience and as a general conception of a lot of hardcore Path of Exile players, and in hardcore I mean by playing in the hardcore leagues, not as we are being so fucking badass, but by playing in the hardcore leagues, it is generally accepted that a character above 202 or a 200% increased maximum life should be doing fairly well in a hardcore league if he has some other kind of damage mitigation. And we do that. We have a lot of mana regeneration rate, as you can see here, and we will be able to sustain a high level Arctic armor when we gain enough of a total mana pool. But that's gained from gear and all that kind of stuff, and I cannot show you that in this program. We can also see that we have a lot of increased elemental damage, we have a lot of increased fire damage, and where's the spell damage? It's there. We have a decent amount of spell damage as well. So our build is going to do, well, it's going to do a lot of damage. It's going to be pretty effective with the right skill gem setup. And that's how you use this program. It's a really nice tool for you to see if your build is going to live up to the expectations and the goals that you set out for yourself. And please understand that I'm not giving you this brief walkthrough and expecting you to understand how the skill tree works or how it is set up. The goal is simply to show you that the goals you set in the beginning of the build is influenced throughout the skill tree. A lot of new players think of the skill tree as the main component in creating a build in Path of Exile, and while it definitely has a big influence, it is more correct to look at it as being in a hand-in-hand relationship with the skill gems, defenses and gear that you choose for your character. After all, the skill nodes in the skill tree are passive and cannot be used actively, such as your skill gems can. The last thing I want to talk to you about is the gearing choices and how they, just as the skill nodes, have to synergize with your overall goal. Since our goal is to have a high life pool, a high mana regen and lots of damage on a fireball for a build to work, there are stats you should try to aim for on your gear as well. Remember, stats on gear is no different from stats gained from choosing a skill point in passive skill tree, so the same rules apply here. And that basically means that on our gear there are certain stats we want to have on it to further improve our character. And since our character wants to have a high life pool, it's a really good idea to have plus to maximum life. As you can see, we have on this helmet, we have 80 plus to maximum life. Do we have something? Yes, we have some life here. You should try to get plus life on all your gear if your goal is to have a character with a high life pool. We also want to have a lot of energy shield, since with this build we are converting energy shield into mana, and I'm sorry to mention this again, but you know that a high total mana pool will leave us with a high mana regeneration rate. As for the offensive stats, it is just as in the skill tree a really big bonus for us to increase our spell damage or our fire damage, and even our elemental damage, as you can on some weapons as well. So if you're watching this, it should hopefully be clear to you that the passive skills that you're choosing in your skill tree is not really that different from the stats that you want on your gear. So when you know what kind of skills you want to go for in the passives tree, well, then you kind of know what kind of stats you want to go for in your gear as well. Okay, so I think it's time for us to finalize this video, guys. And here's the take-home message for anyone out there who wants to try to create a build for himself. Remember, number 1, set a goal for your character and ask yourself, what do you need to do to make this possible? Number 2, choose a skill gem you would like to use and research which support skill gems that synergizes well with that specific active skill gem. And remember, a good place to do this is by visiting the Path of Exile skill feedback subforums. In there you'll get all the information that you require. 3. Design a skill tree that revolves around the skill gems and defenses you wish to utilize. 4. Choose gear that synergizes with your skill tree, skill gems and defenses. And 5, and this is very important, do not be afraid to fail. As a matter of fact, you will probably fail a few times before you succeed. That is not something you should be afraid of. Every good Path of Exile player has failed and learned by doing so. The key word here, guys, is synergy. If you make sure that your skill nodes, gear and skill gems synergize, then you're off to a pretty good start. Hopefully you found this video informative, guys. The first year of my Path of Exile career, I actually just followed other people's builds, as I found it too intimidating to create my own. I was simply too afraid of failing, and I didn't want to create a build that wasn't entirely perfect. And while it can be a good idea to follow a cookie cutter build in the beginning of one's PoE career, you probably won't learn a lot later on if you keep doing that. So when I finally tried to create my own build, it actually succeeded, and it was a very rewarding experience. I was proud that I had created something on my own that actually worked. And well, was it the most badass build ever? No, not at all. And I couldn't get past level 70 maps. However, I now had the knowledge and courage to try out a new build of my own, and that build actually took me to level 78 maps. So the take-home message here, guys, is that you need to learn by doing, and I highly recommend everyone to create, or at least try to create, their own build. You will learn a lot by doing so, and it makes Path of Exile so much more fun and so much more rewarding. Thank you for watching, guys, and bros, do you even nerd?